the WFM. I'm really grateful they've invited me to talk to you today. My name is Heather Beach, and I run a company called the Healthy Work Company. And we're going to talk today about an organisational approach to wellbeing. So definitely not just apples in the office. So just to give you a brief idea of who we are, we've actually only been in existence for a couple of years. Prior to this, I was running Safety and Health Practitioner and Safety and Health Expo, the IELTS Conference, and Barber. And a few years ago, I thought, I'm approaching a significant birthday, and do I really want to be working for a large corporate for the rest of my career, or do I want to go off and do what I'm really passionate about? And what I've been really keen on my whole career is understanding what makes people thrive in life. So what is it that they need to do in order to get the best conditions for themselves, have the best life possible, whatever constraints they have. So I have started a master's in positive psychology, which I'm halfway through. And we started delivering training 2 years ago. I say we because it's now a range of us working together, a range of trainers who have specific expertise in neuroscience, HR, fitness, nutrition. And we really try and put the right trainer in place for your business. So we started really with training. And then about 6 to 9 months ago, people started coming to us and saying, we've done some sort of mental health first aid training and we're not really sure whether it's worked. So we started to look with them at what they were actually trying to achieve when they set this mental health first aid training up. In many cases, it wasn't really very clear. So we've started to look more strategically with people now. We're very clear that we only really work with people who are prepared to look at a training strategy. So, for example, are you going to be being really clear about what your mental health first aiders are all about? And are you going to train your managers as mental health first aiders, or what are you going to do? We also offer optional support with your overall wellbeing strategies, focusing on the mental health side, really, because a lot of businesses haven't really looked at the physical health side in the past. So what is wellbeing in the context of work? Well, it used to mean, as I said, was in the office. So companies that were sort of forward thinking and wanted to have well employees would look at the physical health of their employees. They might get somebody in to do massage, or they might have gym memberships, or they might have yoga classes or cycle to work schemes. But now, over the last few years, we've really recognized that there isn't any health without mental health. And mental and physical health together make up your overall well-being. So what is well-being in the context of work? Well, it's people being happy, engaged, fit, and healthy. So far more than just their physical well-being, it's also about how they feel about their work, how they feel about their lives. Are they engaged and happy? It's quite interesting, really, because we live in a society, don't we, in the UK particularly, and I'm sure in other countries around the world, where our work is a bit of a pain in the neck. We wish that it was Friday every day of the week, and we say, thank God it's Friday, and we wait anxiously for our weekends or for our retirement. And really, when you think about it, we spend an awful lot of our time at work. So really, if you think about the amount of time we spend, and this is quite a complicated calculation, but 23.3% of our total time during the course of a 50-year working life period is spent at work. 35% of our total waking hours over a 50-year working life period is also spent at work. And 50% of our total waking hours during any given working day is spent at work. So do we want to have a work that we really enjoy, that is self-expression for us, that makes us feel happy? Or do we want to relate to it as something we just do in order to get money in so that we can do what we really want to do at the end of the day? Who's interested in this subject, I really recommend this chap whose name is almost impossible to pronounce, but I will have a go. And it is Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. And what he says, it is how we choose what we do and how we approach it that will determine whether the sum of our days adds up to a formless blur or to something resembling a work of art. Csikszentmihalyi had established the idea of flow. And the idea of flow is that when you're engaged in something that you are really good at, that you're being slightly stretched, So you've got just that little bit too much, you've got just that little bit of stretch in there, but actually you know that you can do it and you're being supported to do it, you will be very happy in those periods. It's when time passes and we're not even aware that it's passing. So for me, for example, writing an article, when I'm researching something new, time just flies and I have no idea that I've been through a whole afternoon and not moved. And you will have equivalent experiences like that. So really looking at what we do and the way that we do it will determine whether we are happy in our workplaces or whether we just regard them as a reason for getting money, or perhaps we look at it as a way of having friends and relationships. This is another, and as it's Valentine's Day, I put this one in. We've got Khalil Gibran, who said, "Work is love made visible. If you can't work with love, but only with distaste, it is better that you should leave your work and sit at the gate of the temple and take alms of the people who work with joy." So at this point, you might be asking yourself, what does this have to do with me as a risk professional? Well, for the first thing is, you obviously do work yourselves. And so we hope that the work you're doing does play to your strengths and is something that you really enjoy. But also, if we look at our workplaces, if we have people that are happy and engaged and healthy, our risks are going to be lower in almost every regard than they are if we have the opposite going on. So let's look at the business case for wellbeing. Starting with the moral business case. Well, it's just the right thing to do, isn't it? We know that the World Health Organization says that depression will be the leading cause of disability worldwide by 2020. Nobody wants to work in a workplace where there's been a suicide. It's really miserable and people are angry and they're demotivated. And if you are working in a workplace where you have a significant number of men, this is a risk that you need to be aware of. Who wants to run a business where the employees are unhappy? People want to work in a place which is a happy environment, don't they? And then we have the financial case. In 2016, the Health and Safety Executive's figures showed that stress had overtaken musculoskeletal disorders as the primary reason for ill health at work, the sickness absence. But really, this is kind of not really news because the number of physical health issues that are also caused or exacerbated by stress or anxiety is really high. So there is a huge link between musculoskeletal disorders and stress, which has been looked at in a number of papers. We know already that IBS and some gastrointestinal disorders are caused or exacerbated by stress. Even the common cold. In 2003, Cohen et al. Did some experiments where they pushed the cold virus up the noses of people who had done a subjective well-being survey. And those who had said they were happy, very few of them caught a cold. Those of them who had turned out to have lower subjective well-being caught a cold. So all of our sickness absence is basically impacted by whether we're well and happy at work or whether we're stressed, we have too much stress. Staff turnover. We don't want to work in organisations which are unhappy, where we have managers who are bullies, where we have people doing work which is not engaging and where they don't have any mastery and autonomy over that work, because otherwise our staff turnover is going to be high. Company reputation. So many aspects of this to look at. But just as an example, a couple of weeks ago, there was a post which went viral, which was a lady who'd been interviewed by an organisation and she turned the job down because she said that the guy who interviewed her bullied her. That post went viral. Do you think anybody is going to want to go and work at that organisation in the near future? Probably not. Wellbeing and engagement at work. There's lots of studies that show this, but the reality is it's common sense, isn't it? That if you're well and happy, you're going to be doing better work, you're going to be more productive, you're going to be more engaged in your organisation. And then from a legal perspective, if we just look at the mental health aspects here, the Health and Safety at Work Act does actually call for employers to do a risk assessment for stress and then to act on it. We also have a new piece of health and safety guidance, which has come into the first aid guidance, which calls for suitable and sufficient training on mental health. And for many years, the Equalities Act has included penalties for disability discrimination, so under the HR side here. you're looking at mental health and stress sitting under potentially as a disability. So these are the reasons, business case reasons, why you as a risk professional need to look at this. What can you do about it? Well, you will be used to this because you're not in a position where you can do work by yourselves, are you? You have to build a coalition of support. And this has to be an incredibly broad coalition. So in the past, when we first started work a couple of years ago, we were being invited in by health and safety professionals to come and do some training. And now we're being invited in by health and safety professionals to talk to themselves in HR. And we're generally going back to talk to the board, to actually say to the board why this is something they need to be concerned about, what kinds of things they can do about it. And as I said, in the early days, people were just doing a bit of training, but far better really if you can build a strategy with some measurements that show whether you've succeeded or not. And build a full training program, don't just do some mental health first aid. And you can measure the results that way as well. So let's start with the question, what is mental health? This is an interesting one because, again, I've been doing these presentations now for a couple of years and things haven't really changed in terms of people's understanding. When I go into a room of however many people, between 16 and 200, I find that when I ask the question, what is mental health, people tell me about mental illnesses. They talk about grief, anxiety, depression, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder. They don't talk about mental health per se, they talk about mental illness. So we have a sort of a concatenation between the terms mental health and mental illness in the UK. We hear mental illness when somebody says mental health. Actually, that is mental ill health or mental illness. Interestingly enough, when we do a search on Google and we look for mental health, again, we find a set of images around mental illness. We find somebody with their head in their hands. We find a word cloud around all of these topics, which are all about mental illness. If we do a search on physical health, we get people smiling, happy, playing football, doing yoga, doing exercise of some type. They are all smiling, which is an indication of our relationship with our mental health as opposed to our relationship with our physical health. If you take one thing away from today, I would really like it to be this. This is a chap called Corey Keyes, and he created something called the continuum of flourishing. What he demonstrated in this is that every single one of us has mental health, and it fluctuates. So it fluctuates between flourishing on days when we get up and everything seems possible and we're excited and in awe and looking forward to the day. And then sometimes we get up, we don't feel so good. Perhaps we're going through something difficult at work or in our personal life, and then we have moderate mental health. Or we may actually have some quite severe symptoms. We might be not sleeping. We might be struggling with our food. We might be not snapping at people. We might have symptoms of anxiety, in which case we're languishing. We may be diagnosed with a mental illness, in which case we're languishing with a mental illness. Perhaps we don't get any treatment for that or treatment that works initially. Then we may get some treatment and we may be moving into this moderate mental health and mental illness piece. And then it is also quite possible to flourish with a mental illness. We have many examples of campaigners in this area. We've got Rob Stevenson, and we've just put out a video of him today, actually, that we've created in an SHP magazine, which is him talking about how he manages his bipolar disorder in order to flourish, in order to live as normal a life as he possibly can, and just integrate the fact that he has a mental illness. So this was actually underlined in 2017 by the Farmer Stevenson Review, where they said we start from the position the correct way to view mental health is that we all have it. We fluctuate between thriving, struggling, and being ill, and possibly off work. So this is fundamental to our understanding today of what mental health is all about. And it was from Corey Keyes. Now, we have quite a lot of conversations in the mental health world about this word stress. Some people say, including the health and safety executive, the stress is just bad for you. It's a word which equals bad. In the psychological world, there is something called eustress, EU stress, which is stress, which is actually quite good for you, and then distress, which is when it gets too much for you. And then other people differentiate by saying pressure and stress. However you want to articulate it, what we're trying to show here is that there is a certain amount of challenge, a certain amount of stress, a certain amount of anxiety, a certain amount of pressure, which gets us going. This is the thing which gets us up in the morning, which means that we're goal oriented, that we actually have reason to get up and get moving. We've all been in a job where we've been so bored because we could do it standing on our heads. And that is in this green area, the too little stress area. Where we want to be aiming is for this yellow area, the optimum stress, what Csikszentmihalyi calls flow, where we're actually got just about the right number of plates to spin, we've just got just about the right amount of challenge, where we're working in our strength, where we feel supported, and we're really thriving in that area. But in today's world, where we're all doing too much, how easy is it to tip over into overwhelm? Especially if you get given something which you're not very good at, which you don't really want to do, it can really tip us over very easily. And then what do we do when we get into that position? We keep going, keep rowing harder and harder and faster and faster, or do we actually row back, give ourselves a rest, give ourselves a break? Because if we keep going, we can end up with anxiety, panic, anger, breakdown, what is known in some countries as a medical condition, which is burnout. We just can't get out of bed any longer. We've just been too overwhelmed, we've had too much to do. One of the models that we use, and there are a number of them, is the idea that we all have a different capacity for dealing with stress. So we all have greater resilience than others. So it's a variance based on all sorts of things, including our experience of life. But we can make that container bigger by doing things which actually support our well-being on an ongoing basis. So things like getting the right amount of sleep, getting exercise, and all of those things which support us in ensuring that we're able to deal with the next challenge which comes up. These are the kinds of things that we should be considering when we're managing our own health. The top ones there, good nutrition, exercise, sleep, relaxation, and managing our thinking, are really the things that we consider the bedrock of good health, good mental health specifically. Sleep is particularly important. For many years, it had a reputation as being something we didn't really need to worry about too much. If we were, fast go-getting human beings, you only needed 4 or 5 hours sleep a night. What did Mrs. Thatcher need, for example? But we now understand that it is the bedrock of everything, that if we have a poor night's sleep, we don't eat properly, we don't exercise, and we find that we may catastrophize instead of taking perspective and thinking, actually, is this thing the end of the world? Will it matter in 3 months' time? Or should I take some perspective here? The 3 at the bottom, well, there's an awful lot of research around the things that make us happy and give us meaning and happiness and joy in our lives. And these are some of those which have a lot of research behind them. So supportive relationships is massive. And for our overall resilience, it's really important. Finding meaning and purpose in what we do, particularly finding meaning and purpose in the in our work. It's such a great place to start to find that meaning and purpose. You might not have it in your work. You might have it in something you do outside of work. Maybe you have a hobby that you love, or maybe you get involved in a church or something spiritual, or it's your family that gives you meaning and purpose. But we all need to feel that we're meaningful. And then acceptance and gratitude, accepting things exactly the way that they are and are not, and being grateful for exactly what we have in our lives right now. But the reality is, as my favourite says, there's a cocktail of things that make up happiness. And there are a million ways to live which make us happy. So because we have the formula for ourselves does not mean that it's the right formula for everybody else. But being self-aware and understanding those things that we need in life is really important. So about 6 months ago, I realised that I was starting to get really tight jaws and I was feeling anxious. And I realised that I was working from home on my own an awful lot of the time. And I'm actually quite extrovert as a person. So I needed to think about, right, I need to make a plan for making sure that I talk to people regularly, that I'm out and about and actually meeting people and having phone calls, because that's what I need in order to manage my mental health. And you'll have something equivalent to that. which will be you'll be aware of, which is something that you need to be aware of. Make sure that you manage your mental health appropriately. So what makes up our mental health at work? Well, let's start with us as individuals. You as an individual, are you resilient? So what skills do you have in terms of managing your own resilience? What knowledge do you have about what you need in order to maintain your resilience? And what effort do you put in managing your own mental health? If you know that exercise is really important to you, do you get out and get that exercise? Or do you just not bother? Do you think I've got too much to do? What life events are you going through? We all have times in our lives when life does not go according to the grand plan that we set out for ourselves. And we may well end up languishing because maybe we've got divorced, or we've got made redundant, or we've moved house, or even we've had a joyful event like a baby, which has thrown everything into disarray. So are we going through something at home, which is going to mean that we are less resilient than we would normally be at work? Excuse me. And then the third aspect, you love what you do at work, because it's very difficult to disentangle your mental health at work with your mental health at home. So quite all the people that I've had that have worked for me that have gone through issues related to stress and anxiety have all had issues that have combined in terms of I've put pressure on them at work, which was inappropriate given what was going on with them at home. And you don't know what came first, chicken or egg. And it's a question of them actually taking the time to sort both of those things out with your support. So that's the individual. And then there's your manager. Well, we all know our manager has a massive impact on our mental health at work, doesn't he or she? So really, for managers, it's really important that we are self-aware. We know what kinds of things make us react, and we are then able to stop ourselves reacting because we have such a massive impact on those around us. Are we good listeners? Are we flexible? Are we understanding? Do we come in the same every day, or does it depend on whether we've had a good night's sleep or not, or what our manager has said to us, how well we deal with everybody around us? It's really a commitment to self-mastery and to continuing to work on ourselves as managers, which is so important. And so as an individual, you've got yourself and your own resilience, and then you've got your manager who's also makes a massive impact. And then the third aspect, no matter how good your manager is, no matter how resilient you are, there are going to be issues in your organisation which are going to make life more stressful than it need be on occasion. The health and safety executive has 6 factors here. They look at demands, which are, the amount of work that you have to do. Control, which is mastery and autonomy. How much say do you have in the way you do your job and what you have to do? Because it's the more mastery and autonomy you have, the greater your ability to deal with what's going on around you will be. Support is a very broad category because it not only includes support from your manager, but it also includes the systems that you have to use in that organisation. We've all worked in places where actually the systems are an absolute nightmare. You have expense systems fill out, which you dread getting onto, or some organisations put in VoIP phones without testing them properly when everybody has to use the phone. Those types of things will cause stress. Relationships, are relationships well managed in your organisation? If there are issues between people, if there's conflict, they get sorted out in a mature way, or are they just left better? Your role. Is your role very clear in relation to everybody else's, your responsibilities? Or is there crossover? Because that again causes stress. Change, we all know that change is absolutely endemic. There's no way of working in an organisation these days without having change. But how is that managed in your organisation? Are there really clear communication routes? Are you communicated with all the time? Do you feel you have a say in what change happens and how it happens? Or is it just landed on you from above and you just have to get on with it? Now, these 2 extra ones on the end, they don't come from the HSE, they come from the Canadian Centre, which also has a stress risk assessment. And I really like these 2 because they look at inclusion. They're looking at diversity and inclusion, and then reward and recognition, because it can be very stressful if you are part of an organisation where you feel you're not being rewarded appropriately, or other people are being rewarded and you're not for the same work. So these are all the types of things that you should look at within your organisation. Understand where is it worthwhile focusing to improve the experience of the people in your organisation in relation to stress. We've actually developed a questionnaire around this, which we can run with you, and we can analyse and report the results as well. We can bespoke this for you, or we can just offer you the survey that we've developed. So what's your process? Well, look, this is just one process. There are many models available. There are many ways of doing this, but this is the way that we've done it with people. So create a vision, look at a model, and the model that we've alighted on uses three aspects. It uses awareness and education, which is training, effectively, making people understand what mental health is, how to look after their own, what kinds of things to look out for in other people, and how to talk to people when you think they're struggling. And then there's also the prevention of ill health, physical and mental. And here your questionnaires come in. So, for example, if you're running a wellbeing or a stress survey with us, that would indicate where in your organisation you're causing people to be stressed. We'd also look at your sickness absence data with you. We'd look at your use of the EAP and any more questionnaires that you have, such as your HR engagement survey. And then finally, there's intervention. So what happens when it goes wrong? Are your managers trained to have that first conversation? And then beyond that, where do you send people? Do you have an EAP, which is used, and do people know about it? And does it cover the right things for you? We're working with a lady who's done a lot of work in health data, and she says that most EAPs are not used successfully and are really not a good use of money for organisations, because they aren't looking at what specifically among their population is required. So that is really where you could be looking. And then you look at a timetable and you look at costs to deliver and how you're going to measure the success of that programme. Here's three visions from which have been shared with me. So the CBA is the Commonwealth Bank of Australia. I was lucky enough to get a long meeting with them last year when I was in Sydney, and I was really interested that Australia seems to be quite a long way ahead of the UK in terms of its wellbeing strategy. Mental health first aid actually started in Australia in the year 2000, and they're probably about 6 or 7 years in terms of what they're doing. So they're not even doing mental health first aid anymore over there. They're looking at programs called Thrive, which is music to my ears, it has to be said. Not the fact that they're calling it Thriving Systems. So this is theirs. And then we have two other organisations in the UK who are really not just talking about this, but doing really root and branch work to ensure that they do well-being really, really well. So we're committed to ensuring healthy workplaces, helping our people and those that work with us to be physically and mentally fit so they can perform at their best and live full lives. And then Life Securities, who as a client at the top of the supply chain have a massive role to play, not only in their own organisation, but also in the rest of that supply chain, in order to ensure that everybody in that chain is happy, healthy and engaged. Right, this is the model that we've chosen. There are many out there. There's PERMA, which is a positive psychology model. There are other models available. We've chosen this one because it seems very practical to us. So it looks at your mind, your life and work, and your body. And it looks inside of that at the awareness and education, i.e. the training, the prevention and the intervention, which really gives us three nice sort of subheadings to go down in terms of how we're going to organise what we actually do. When we look at awareness and education, we're really clear that you really need to tailor your content for the right audience. Now, Mental Health First Aid has become sort of the go-to program for everybody, and it is a very good program. It's excellent if you want to train, if you want to just provide literacy throughout the organisation for people who, for anybody, just make it available to anybody. That is a brilliant way of doing it. If you're going to actually appoint people as mental health first aiders, you need to really consider what that role looks like, and you need to be making sure that the right people are there. So you might want to ensure that there are people in particular parts of the organisation who are mental health first aiders, and you might want to consider very carefully whether you make your managers mental health first aiders or not, because if you do make them mental health first aiders, they should really be supporting each other But just be aware that you're putting them into a bit of a conflict of interest if one of their team comes to them and says, I want to talk to you about a problem I'm having. Because as their manager, they do have legal responsibilities which are different to those of a mental health first aider. So hence, we prefer to do training separately with people. So we prefer to train managers in what their responsibilities are. We recognise the signs and symptoms of stress and distress, mental distress in general, to have a conversation with confidence with that person in knowledge of the law around, for example, reasonable adjustment, and the importance of them mastering themselves because of the impact that they have on the people around them. We also train in mental health first aid, and I've said we've got a number of recommendations that we make around that, including a clear terms of reference for those individuals, which we think is really important, and the boundaries that they should have in place as well. The IOSH, or I think it was the IOSH report, or it might have been the HSE one, but there were two that came out the back end of last year, one of which was basically highlighting that some mental health first aiders had those boundaries well and truly broken by people sort of texting them late at night, calling them for support. It isn't really what a mental health first aider should be there for. So just be aware before you start that program that you need to put some terms of reference carefully about who you're going to allow to do that role, and you need to think about monitoring the numbers of conversations in order to ensure you have the right number. And then over and above that, we also run just individual, what is mental health, what is resilience, 90-minute sessions, which we can do in very large groups, or we can do in small groups back to back. We quite often do 4 in one day, 90 minutes, 90 minutes, 90 minutes, and 90 minutes for different parts of your organisation. Over and above that, one thing which we have recently started doing is we started with 90 minutes for the board. So our preferred way of working is that we go in and identify who your key stakeholders, your heads of department, your board are, and we do 90 minutes for them to talk about what mental health is, what the business case for mental health is, why they should be concerned about it, and what kinds of things are going to be business benefits for them in getting involved. So when we talk about why we deal with managers separately, well, almost every piece of research, almost every campaign really does focus on what line managers bring to this. And as you saw in my wheel cog diagram earlier, they are a really important aspect of your program. You know, some organizations say, well, you know, our managers just don't really have that skill set. They don't really like to talk to people about this stuff. And really, we just want to get mental health first aiders in place. But the reality is that if you have line managers that are not able to do this, then are they really line managers? Because they play a crucial role in promoting positive employee well-being. And it's a tough role because they have to deliver business objectives at the same time as supporting the well-being of their employees. We've developed some forum theatre, which we ran for the first time at an event in construction last year for Building Magazine. And I was really struck when I was watching that, just how difficult that conversation is for a manager. And I remember myself, as a manager of a large team, spotting people that I probably should talk to, but being concerned about getting it wrong. So being concerned about being intrusive, or being concerned about overstepping the mark, or saying something that would get me in trouble. You know, will I end up in a tribunal if I say this? So we really look at training managers in this, and really it's a half day with a must contain. So that's signs and symptoms of mental distress, having the conversation, listening skills, signposting help, and then the law in their relation to their responsibilities. We've done some training in different parts of the world as well, and you know, managers and the law does work differently. So in some parts of the world, in France, in Holland, for example, the company doctor has a massive set of responsibilities, which in the UK sit with the manager. So the company doctor will make recommendations on whether that employee should return to work and what the reasonable adjustments should be, whereas that sits in the UK with the manager together with HR. So there are different ways of working in different parts of the world. And then if you want to do this really well, so you're not doing another program of education for your managers around just in general being a better boss, you should probably do a full day. which is looking at the role they play in their team's well-being, self-awareness and self-mastery, and the importance of self-care. This is a difficult role. As a middle manager particularly, you're managing upwards, you're managing downwards, you've also got your family, you've got so much going on. So it's really encouraging managers to make sure that they don't try to pour from an empty cup, that they look after themselves, and what sorts of things make a difference in terms of looking after yourself in that arena. And then we have the first aid, the mental health first aid program. So this is a 2-day program or a 1-day program. We say it's generally better to do with non-people managers, because these conversations with a mental health first aider should be confidential. So if I go and see you as my mate and I say, I'm struggling at the moment, this is going on, that's going on, unless there's a risk to life, as a mental health first aider, I shouldn't go and talk to anybody about that. I can keep a register that I've had a number of conversations and how long they've taken, but I shouldn't say who it's with. I shouldn't say what it was about. I should actually be completely confidential. And inside about what we look at is what is mental health, what is stress. We look at basic information on mental illnesses. We have a conversation with a peer in distress, and we allow people to discuss that. And then signposting within the company and externally. And we most definitely look at self-care, which as a mental health first aider is really important, because you're looking at the impact on your own mental health of supporting somebody else, especially when you're not an expert in this area. It's really clear also that it's not about therapy, it's not about diagnosis, it's purely about supporting that person, normalising what they're going through, and signposting where they should go next for further support. Awareness and education for individuals. We're looking at the key elements of good health, including mental health, and we give them a series of nudges really to promote good habits. We know that the latest research in habits shows that it's very, very difficult to break these big ones. We'll start with these huge New Year's resolutions, don't we? I'm going to lose 2 stone. I'm going to drink 3 litres of water every day. I'm going to walk 10 miles or whatever it is. But actually, we're much better if we just focus on small changes to our lifestyle to actually promote good habits and good health. So, for example, getting off the bus a stop earlier, making our lunch every day before we go in, so we know exactly what we're going to eat. So small changes to small aspects will build over time and will gradually improve our health. And we can do, we've got content. We've created a service for Barber called the Wellbeing Service, which is policies, it's guidance, it's toolbox talks. We've got a whole range of stuff on there, and we can supply content we've written for your intranet. We're developing an e-learning module, and also we can do these face-to-face 90-minute short courses. We also have specific topics. So we developed one last year around fatigue, because sleep, as we said earlier, is a massive issue, and how to manage that so that you get the best possible results for yourself. And then we look at preventing ill health. And we talked a little bit about this earlier, that really this is about suitability. So this should be informed by your sickness data, absence data, the surveys, whether we do a wellbeing survey or a stress risk assessment, or look at your existing HR engagement survey, and then add questions to that. But it's looking at the environmental and physical factors. It's looking at mind, body, and education awareness, and then good work. Is there good work in your organisation? Should you be looking at flexible working? How much autonomy do you give people? Is your reward and recognition programs recognised as being fair? Do you promote inclusion? Do you promote good relationships and resolve conflict when it occurs? This I thought was interesting. It was in 2018, towards the end of the year this was published, and it was from Deloitte, and it had 11,000 people across the globe that were surveyed. And they said that this is what we value as employees versus what employers actually offer. And as you can see up there, the most important one is flexible schedules and the ability to work from home where necessary. And it's so difficult these days to manage everything between life and work, isn't it? Especially when we've got children involved. It just becomes so tricky to manage. So the more flexibility we can give people, and as time goes on, I'm convinced that we will start to monitor people on output as opposed to the number of hours that they work, which really does seem a little bit nuts, doesn't it? That if we sit at a desk between 9 to 5 that do not very much. We get paid regardless of what we've output. It really should be taken out. I think as time goes on, that will change. So you want to be measuring your success. So there are measures that you can put in your staff engagement survey, or as I said, can run a specific wellbeing survey for you. If you did that every 2 years, you'd be able to see what impact you've made. You can participate in Britain's Healthiest Workplaces, which allows you to benchmark yourself among in industries which are similar to yours. You can look at training feedback sheets. What do people know beforehand and what do they know afterwards? And then the use of peer-to-peer support. How many conversations have been had by first aiders in your organisation? And then there's also sickness absence data. So really, and this is pretty much my final slide, but going back to what is well-being in the context of work, well, I'm a bit of an Aristotle fangirl. He said more than 2,000 years ago that the meaning of life is happiness, because it's the only thing which we don't do in order to do something else. So in other words, we get money in order to be happy. We get success in order to be happy. We get reputation in order to be happy. But we don't do happiness in order to do anything else. So he saw it as the highest goal. And he saw that the way to be happy was to understand your meaning and purpose and to live congruently with that. And you find your meaning and purpose by understanding what you're really good at. So being the best that you can be in relation to your function. So if you don't know what your strengths are, then I highly recommend you do a strengths test and understand exactly what they are, and then spend as much time as you can in line with your working in line with your strengths. Good work is good for us. Unemployment is the hardest trauma to recover from. If we're looking at something like post-traumatic growth, you know, there can be growth after bereavement. There can be growth after other issues that can provide us with curveballs in our life. But unemployment is very difficult to recover from. So being in work is good for us. So let's make sure that we take care of the hygiene factors, make sure that people have their basic needs covered, their pay, their welfare, their work-life balance works. Make sure that we have a collaborative culture and there are opportunities connecting with people, that our managers are good, committed to self-awareness and self-mastery, that we provide ongoing education for people, that we are playing to people's strengths and that they have individual confidence and self-esteem. And yeah, so that really, I think that's it really. If you want to get in contact with me, these are my details. This is my email address and my mobile phone number. Very happy to talk further to anybody if you want to. I know that the RSM are going to provide this on demand, so you can have this afterwards if you want to show it to anybody else in your organisation. But also happy to talk to anybody individually. They will also provide a CPD certificate if you want one as well. So I don't know if anybody got any questions. I think you had one, didn't you? Yes. Okay, so I've got one here. What kinds of things should you include in a mental health first aid training course? Okay, well, right, there is actually an official sort of mental health first aid course, which is run by Mental Health First Aid England. Originally, it was started in Australia, and now it's run by Mental Health First Aid England. And this is now actually going to be, well, first aid for mental health will become a legal requirement shortly in the UK. And within this, you should be looking at things like the signs and symptoms of mental distress, how to have a conversation with somebody in order to be supportive, and how to signpost them to the next, where they should go next, which is generally going to be the GP, but you also might be looking at your internal employee assistance program. You also would be looking at mental illnesses. What are mental illnesses? You look at the continuum of flourishing, the Corey Keyes model that I showed you earlier, which was the one thing that I hope you take away from today. You also look at how to look after yourself, so the whole self-care aspect of it. And as I said earlier, I think it's really important if you're going to embark on mental health first aid that you do have a plan for that. So where are you going to put your mental health first aid? You're going to make sure you're enough in each part of your business that people will always have somebody to go to. And you're going to make sure there's a system for for recording numbers of conversations so that you are aware that you have the right number of first aiders in place. So yeah, that's really what I would say on that one. Anything else for anybody? So we've got one other here. Would love to have a copy of the webinar. Yes, we can certainly do that. Right, so we've got another one. Is this training required for all members of the organisation? Okay, so really, I'm pretty sure that the legislation will be looking at what is suitable and sufficient for your organisation. So I think having some form of training for everybody is a good idea. Whether you do that face-to-face or whether you make an e-learning platform available, but this doesn't need to be anything major. It doesn't need to be 1 or 2 days. It can be a short half day or 90 minutes or running through a training program on e-learning, just to give people awareness of what mental health is and isn't. To ensure they're looking after themselves, to make sure they understand the importance of their own resilience. So that's what you should do for everybody. Mental health first aid per se, or getting first aiders in your organisation for mental health. I don't know whether there will be any kind of percentages in there, because there is a physical first aid. It's supposed to be around 10%. But I'm not sure that will be the case for mental health first aid or not. At this point in time, the guidance is very much saying that, you know, suitable and sufficient. So the numbers that you need are in line with the numbers that you think you need, effectively. I would recommend, as I said, that you train your managers, though, because they are the ones that are going to be in the firing line if something goes wrong. You know, they're the ones that could end up in a tribunal. So train them with an understanding of what they should do if they recognise somebody in mental distress, what a reasonable adjustment is, and why reasonable adjustments are really important, and why they're a legal requirement. Making sure they involve specialists, whether it be HR or occupational health or somebody else in the organisation that's dealing with that area. But just make sure that they understand their specific responsibilities in this regard, I would say would be a really good idea for organisations to do. That's it on the questions. Thank you very, very much for attending today. Thank you, RRSM, for the invitation and for organising all of this. And have a wonderful Valentine's Day, everybody. I hope that your house is carpeted in roses and flowers. Thank you very much. I'll hopefully see you on another webinar soon. Bye-bye.